Okay, here is the Lifetime Weber 132 straight out of the box. I have some plans for modifications for this. For river kayaking, I am not a fisherman. I want to make adjustments to this kayak for more of adventure touring, long-term comfort, and camping. I wonder how this works. Oh yeah, that is really cool. If I pull this end down, then that end goes up. See that? Okay, now as you can see, I've got the kayak up on some sawhorses, ready to be worked on. I did some measurements of the little back storage area here, and I just happened to find this Coleman cooler. It is a 28 quart cooler, and if I put it right here, it fits perfectly in the back. So that's a pretty fortunate find for me. And then for some storage in the front, I found this. It's called a shower caddy, and this is where the footrests are, and this one fits right in there. My feet don't go all the way to this last footrest. It actually goes to here, so it'll be out of the way. And that's going to be my onboard storage, my above deck storage for things, amongst other modifications I'm going to make. This is a table full of the things that I'm going to use to try to improve the performance of this kayak. They're all going to be added in some way, shape, or form to the kayak to hopefully get a little bit more performance out of it. Starting at the top, I have some PVC pieces here that I'll be using to make a sort of a rack system that goes behind my seat. Some paint for that PVC. I've got a little sport umbrella to shade myself during the day. Bought a couple of deck plates, some linkages, D-rings, some other things that I'm going to use to attach different items to the kayak. And this dog leash I'm going to use as a paddle tether. I have some weather stripping, foam weather stripping, lithium grease for the threads of my deck plates. But first, I'm going to do what every new kayak owner does and seal this thing up so I can minimize the amount of water infiltration into the hull as much as possible. I'd love to be able to eliminate it. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do it, but I'm going to try. Okay, so this part's pretty straightforward. I'll spare you too many of the boring details. Basically, anything that's added to a plastic kayak is added with screws. Anywhere a screw penetrates the hull of the kayak is a potential source for water intrusion into the hull. So the plan is to out, take your silicone, add silicone to the underside of the attachment being put in. And then replace it. Sorry for the shaky video, I'm doing this all one-handed. Get it turned the right way. Now, very important, if you're using a drill, make sure your torque setting is set low enough so you don't strip out the hole, because that would just make it so the clip wouldn't stay in any longer. Alright, so now when the silicone cures, not sure if you can see that, but it makes a seal all the way around the base of the clip. Well, I'm afraid that if I do end up with leaks in this boat, it's going to be because of this hatch that came installed by the manufacturer. It's got a gasket and it's got a plastic ring on top, but it does not seal at all. And then these little arms here that are supposed to hold the lid down onto the interior gasket, they don't hold it down hard enough. And so it's got there's a lot of play in there. So I already siliconed all the way around the base just to try to keep the water that will run around these gutters away from the inside of my hull. But I may just end up replacing it altogether with an 8-inch deck plate. But not at this moment. Maybe sometime in the future. Alright, I sealed up all the hatches and I let the silicone cure, as you can see. And so now the next step is to cut out that hole in the bow and insert this deck plate so I can have access to all of the storage space that's inside the front of the boat. Okay, well, here's the hole cut, and I've got the screws pre-drilled, and you want to make sure that this deck plate is snug, but not too snug. It needs to go in without too much force, but no rattle, basically. If it's too tight, it'll actually warp the ring, and then the plate itself won't thread in properly, and you don't want that. So now I'm going to take my silicone and put a nice thick bead all the way around the hole and install the deck plate ring. Alright, there's the ring installed. I'm going to try screwing the lid in, the plate in. Okay. There we go. And that should be watertight. I used a nice thick bead of silicone. Made sure I got enough silicone around the screw holes as well, and this will be great. Now I have plenty of extra space that I can store gear inside the bow of my kayak. So to increase the life of this tiny little O-ring right there that runs around the deck plate, I'm going to use just a little dab of this white lithium grease. It'll increase the life of that O-ring, keep it from sticking, and it'll also, a little bit on the threads, will help this deck plate screw on and off a lot easier. Okay, in order to build this rack system that I'm envisioning for the back of the kayak here, we have these rod holders on the back, and they're almost exactly the same diameter as a 1 1/4 inch piece of PVC. I mean, it will fit in there, but it's pretty snug. So what I did was I just took my belt sander to the end, and it should slide right in there now. So that's what it ends up with. I already did the other side. Now I'm going to cut it right here and make it go vertical, and then over to meet the other side. Okay, so here you see I have the 45-degree elbows glued in place with a 1 1/4 inch to 1 inch reducer. I'm still dry fitting these conduit elbows, but hopefully you can see the idea here. And it's basically just going to be a bar that runs behind my back that I can hang things on, like my weather radio and my sunscreen and my bug spray and things like that, just so it's a little more easily accessible. I can still turn around and get the cooler open and open it far enough to have access to whatever's in the cooler. So next I have to measure the length for the piece that goes in between here, and glue everything together and then prep it for paint. Okay, I got all the parts glued together except for the very last joint that I'm going to do as I assemble this on the boat. I prepared the PVC for paint simply by taking this PVC primer here and just soaking the plastic in it. It's, you know, it served two purposes. It's prepared the surface to receive a coat of paint, and it also kind of cleaned off all the ink, dirt, everything that was on it. So now that the surface has been prepared, I'm going to use that can of tan spray paint, paint it, see how it turns out. Well, I'm running out of daylight here, but here is the roll bar, whatever you want to call it, all painted up, glued up, and installed. I really like it. I hope it's as useful as I expect it to be. I've given myself enough clearance so I can still turn around in my seat and open up the cooler. And I'll use some prusik knots or something up here to hang different gear all along, all the essential stuff. It's not, you know, the most secure item on the boat. I've only got 3 screws here and then 3 screws on the other side holding it in, and there's a lot of cantilever going on in this area here, so it does wobble a little bit, but it's not supposed to be load bearing or anything. And as long as none of my scouts accidentally try to pick up the kayak by it, we should be okay. You having a good time there, buddy? Well, this is the aftermath of a 5-day, 50-mile float trip down the Current River near Eminence, Missouri. The kayak held up very well. Hardly any wear and tear on the bottom side, despite all the landings that we made and, you know, dragging bottom on occasion. As you can see, I'm missing the whole apparatus that I built in the back. Just the way that these fishing pole holders are fastened just isn't ideal. I really need to find a better way. But I found that really I didn't even need to have access to hardly anything directly behind me because there's so much storage space throughout the rest of the kayak. As far as the amount of water that got in the hull, everything did really well. There was some water that got in. I really do blame, obviously, this big gaping hole here. I did have the fishing rod holder partially inserted, but it was not sealed because it had gotten wrenched loose in transit, and I couldn't fix it by the time we started the trip. I think the biggest culprit, though, is this guy, the factory installed hatch. It's supposed to be easy access with these levers, but the only thing it does is it's just loose, and it lets a lot of water in. So I'll be replacing that hatch. As far as I know, all the other screws and attachments that I sealed up held. This hatch that I put in the bow here held tight. I mean, if I wanted to keep something dry, I kept it in the bow, because my weight combined with the cooler weight in the back kept the bow just slightly out of water, enough to keep all of any water that it had accumulated inside the kayak towards the stern end of the boat. This thing was a pleasure to ride on. It took some effort to keep it straight in the slow parts of the river, but I kind of expected that. It's kind of flat on the bottom. I tipped it once when I had a branch shoot up into a scupper hole when I was sideways. It was just under the surface and it just tipped me out. It didn't flip it over or anything. But in the process, I ended up losing my paddle, which is entirely my own fault. I had a paddle tether attached to the paddle, and it was velcroed right here, and I had the D-rings all ready to go to attach it to my paddle tether, and I just failed to make that last connection. And so you live and you learn. But as far as a $360 or so, $380 kayak goes, this is a steal, and I look forward to taking it out on the lake that I live near and using it more regularly, and maybe I'll even take up fishing now that I have something to go out on the water with.